Sex Anthropology, Colonialism, and Exotic Eroticism. Disclaimer, these are not my personal views, but rather was created to serve educational purposes. To begin with, what we feel is normal in sexuality is bounded to specific geographies ranging from the nation-state and cities down to the bodies of citizens, which creates complex order flows of desire, according to Hubbard 2001. Basically, geographic location, cultural assumptions, and trends in time governs how we express our intimacy and sexuality, and what we consider to be normal. The notion of global health attempts to provide an ontology of epidemic diseases that explain the patterns, consequences, and causes and methods of intervention and risk prevention, according to King 2002. Ontology is the way we come to know the makeup of a thing, how things and concepts are defined and categorized. Global health also creates narratives and historical, moral economies that explain why people find themselves in certain situations being blamed for victories or failures in regards to issues of health, disease, and sexuality. Sexuality serves as a major point of contention for most cultures, as it is assigned great value and is understood from a different point of view. During the height of 19th century colonialism, sexuality was used by the West as a metaphor for paving the way for progress, enlightenment, and European dominance over the native populations. Social relations were exploited by the colonizer over the colonized. The notable literature professor Edward Said wrote Orientalism and the Other in 1978, and this described the Orient as being viewed diametrically opposed to the West, being seen as unchanging, homogeneous, and inferior. The other was a way to conceptualize a perceived inferior who is alien to oneself. Said recognized three different types of Orientalism: the shaping of the comprehensive Western discourse, academic discipline, which legitimized studying the Orient, often with ethnocentric biases, and colonial institution. Medicine and biology in the 19th century invoked recurring images of diseases that was analogous to the social hierarchy, distress, and poverty. Disease, corruption, decadence, promiscuity, and irrationality were presumptions that became linked with the colonies, and these stereotypes still live on today in public health initiatives. The primitive peoples were associated with the trope of degenerate sexuality, which was tied to femaleness. This was because women were seen as more of a slave to biological urges, assumed to be more animalistic, and their uncontrolled sexuality was seen as pathological. Promiscuity became wrapped around notions of disease. At first, sexual contact was encouraged between colonials and locals, but this led to fears that the racial distinctions would become more blurred. Indigenous women were viewed as uncontrolled sexuality. The world and even newly discovered territories were viewed as virgin lands, which needed to be mapped, conquered, controlled, and penetrated. Asia was viewed as mystical. Africa was viewed as filled with sexual aberration. It was common for European explorers or colonials to get a pillow dictionary, basically to get a local girlfriend who would help the Europeans to learn the local language. Psychoanalysts believe that colonialism and exploration promoted the fear of transgressing what was previously defined boundaries, which led to primal anxieties and the need to control. In the mid-19th century, purity campaigns were encouraged to limit sexual contact, imposing new regulations and reinforcing racial purity and discouraging racial deviance. The fear of encroaching degeneracy led to the creation of tropical medicine, which desired to control infected bodies by setting boundaries. It also encouraged wives to be imported from the motherland to suppress mixing with natives. Nearing the end of the 19th century, social Darwinism became a popular science, which reinforced the idea that human history and culture progressed in a series of stages. and that primitives were inferior both culturally and racially or biologically. Even those who were stricken with poverty or of a lower socioeconomic status were described to have inferior biology, depicting them as degenerate and primitive. These traits were seen as being heritable, thus also discouraging mixing between the classes. A contrast was an artwork made by Abraham Solomon that depicted lower class women as being robust, sexually fertile, in having more children and having a stronger build. Upper class women were shown as being weaker, delicate, and vulnerable. This was because upper class women afforded corsets that maintained a desirable shape but restricted them from breathing properly and from moving. Thus, social Darwinism also justified differences in class and race, though perhaps not for the right reasons. Things like the corset are to blame for behavioral differences rather than any biological essentialism. Panoptical time was an idea that portrayed the industrialized West as superior and that other societies were stuck at different stages. Anthropometry was developed as a measure of head size and shape to discern humans from those who were believed to have animal traits. This served to confirm racial stereotypes and dehumanize people of other races. The other became symbolic of degeneracy and suffering, becoming viewed as a melting pot of infection and disease, and reinforced the need for more totalizing and imperialistic control. An example of confirmation bias used to reaffirm their theory of man, a film was created to depict the Hottentot Venus. In 1810, Sarah Bartman was brought to London from Cape Town and was displayed naked for people to see. Many came to see her huge posterior, which was viewed as a monstrosity, being viewed as ugly, hypersexualized, dirty, and morally offensive by the Brits. She was ridiculed, prodded, and even fetishized by Frenchmen when she was brought to Paris. Naturalists used her form and physiology in hopes to codify the differences between the races, but Parisians viewed her as something to be desired, and this made French women anxious. So as you can see, the effects of colonialism, social Darwinism, even anthropometry become made manifest in this fetishizing and obsession with the Hottentot Venus, which ultimately dehumanized Sarah Bartman. In addition, epidemiology or public health was created to enforce sanitation regimes and control the livelihood of the urban poor. Sewers and access to clean water were the aims of public health projects, but these also served to create a chasm between a healthy us from a unhealthy or diseased them. Men were viewed as being susceptible to contracting diseases, as well as contracting primitive attitudes and behaviors that may decivilize them, thus justifying the need for boundaries to be put in place. By the 1840s, doctors started writing books that classified and described features of the promiscuous woman, all in the effort to control moral contagion. Even today, health and sexuality continues to be linked with Orientalism, colonialism, eroticism, and perceived inferiority of the other, and the politics of contagion control. Stereotypes persist about Africans being hypersexual and susceptible to AIDS, which leads to victim blaming and justification for inaction, according to Stillwagon in 2003. This affects how we view sexuality, disease, other cultures, health, race, class, history, and colonialism.
And 322. MQ Uni course. From Dr. Syabha Nerving. These were my own summary of her lectures.
And yeah, thanks for watching. Bye bye.